I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. The National Institutes of Health are the Bethesda, Maryland based U.S. government funded and controlled biomedical research giant at the center of right wing anger over COVID lockdowns, vaccine mandates, and gender health. NIH leaders, including Anthony Fauci, who headed the NIH Institute of Infectious Diseases, publicly and privately fought with President Trump to keep the scientific agency independent and separate from politics. Trump believed that COVID and the concomitant role played by the scientific community cost him the 2020 elections. After he returned to power in 2025, the NIH was going to be in the crosshairs. The Trump administration appointed a new NIH director, Bhattacharya, a dissident doctor and scientist who, in October 2020, co-authored a broadside against the NIH-led scientific consensus on the COVID pandemic called the Great Barrington Declaration. Great Barrington is a small mountain town in the Massachusetts Berkshires, where the text of the declaration was written. The declaration argued that the scientific consensus in 2020 was wrong about pandemic lockdowns and the role of herd immunity. Bhattacharya and his co-authors pushed for a dramatically different approach. They wanted to allow young and healthy people less susceptible to serious COVID infection to go about their lives normally, while asking vulnerable older people and those with comorbidities to remain at home. The harms of the lockdown, they said, were significant enough not to wait for a vaccine to reopen society. The vaccine was not ready at that time. The scientific leadership, including at NIH, rejected the Great Barrington Declaration, blackballed Bhattacharya and other dissidents, and set up the political fault line that has haunted not just biomedical research, but the country itself. Many right-wing groups were born in the crucible of pandemic closures. That Trump appointed Bhattacharya, a medical doctor, an epidemiologist, a Stanford University professor, and a science review panelist for NIH was not surprising. Here was an eminent scientist with the right credentials who disagreed with the scientific establishment he believed cost him the 2020 elections. Since Bhattacharya's arrival, NIH has fired more than 5,000 scientists and staff, frozen almost $10 billion in grants, undermined peer review, and forced self-censorship of health disparity research. NIH scientists and staffers have risen up in protest. Almost every Saturday, groups of NIH staff have gathered in front of the agency's offices in Bethesda to sound alarm. But this week, they wrote a complaint of their own and called it the Bethesda Declaration. I spoke with two current NIH employees who signed the letter and one former NIH employee who has been laid off. Molly Manier is a scientific review specialist. Ian Morgan works on molecular targeting in microbiomes. They still have their jobs. Anna Culbertson is also a scientific review specialist who was let go. All three of my guests made it a point to say that they are here in their personal capacities and do not represent NIH or any other body. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I got all the rest of my life to figure out what I didn't get right. I got all the rest of my days to figure out how I let you slip away. Take me back
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. We celebrate new music for the summer, and this is Silver Spring's own power pop band, the Airport 77s. Andy Sullivan on guitar, John Kelly on drums, and Cal Everett, famously of the band 4 out of 5 Doctors, on the bass. The songs we play come from their brand new album, Don't Let Go. You can find the Airport 77s at airport77s.com and at live concerts all over the DC region.
Pop, pop radio, baby, one more time. Take me back before it all fell apart. Before you broke my heart. Take me back to 1999. We thought it would last forever. The 31st of December, singing along with the pop, pop, pop. Parties over Woodside of Time.
Molly Menier, Anna Culbertson, Ian Morgan, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
This week, over 300 NIH staff and scientists wrote a letter to the Trump-appointed NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya in protest against the administration's policy. All three of you signed the letter. What is your complaint?
The letter outlines 5 primary points and asks. The first is the politicization of science, particularly in the areas of health disparities, COVID, long COVID and immunization, health impacts of climate change, gender identity, sexual health, and biomedical needs of intersex people, and finally, basically diversity in scientific research and broadening participation in biomedical research. The second point is we are dissenting with the interruption of foreign collaboration that is happening on the grant management and extramural research side. And when I say extramural, I mean the NIH funding that goes to research that happens outside of NIH. The third point is the undermining of peer review, and in particular, the reallocation of already allocated funding to what we see as pet projects of the administration that are not supported or have undergone peer review. Fourth is enacting a blanket 15% cap on indirect costs. And then the fifth was the widespread firing of essential NIH staff, including Anna here, that are critical to fulfilling the mission of NIH.
How many people have been fired as yet?
The estimate is around 5,000.
Out of a total staff of how many?
It's tricky to say. There are approximately 20,000 what are called full-time employees, but that there are many others who are not considered to be full-time employees, which could be contractors, trainees like me. We know that approximately 5,000 have been fired or put on administrative leave.
Or forced out.
I think that doesn't include actually people being forced out from Vera, VSIP, and other types of things. That's just the people who have been purposely fired or put on administrative leave.
You called your letter the Bethesda Declaration. Bethesda, Maryland is where NIH is located. The term declaration invokes Jay Bhattacharya's own dissent from NIH and scientific orthodoxy during the COVID pandemic. Are you trying to draw a parallel between your protest and Dr. Bhattacharya's complaint in 2020?
Yes, Dr. Bhattacharya dissented from the scientific majority when he wrote the Great Barrington Declaration. And he has since been a proponent of scientific dissent. And so we wanted to take him at his word and express our scientific dissent as to the impact that these policies are having on the scientific community.
We've been trying to get in touch with Director Bhattacharya for months now, since his first week. And, I know people inside on the program officer front have been trying to get in touch with him on concerns. The NIH Fellows Union, who I'm part of, sent a letter to him in his very first week, welcoming him, bringing a number of urgent concerns to him, and requesting a meeting to be able to address those concerns. And that letter was completely ignored. It has been 2 months since then. We actually staged a walkout at a town hall where he had scripted questions and wasn't willing to have a true dialogue with us. And so because of that, we sent him multiple follow-ups to request another meeting to address ongoing concerns. Being able to show him how important this issue is to us, this issue of the politicization and disruption of science, and the total takedown of the NIH by a failure of leadership. We, of course, had to show how serious we were, how important this was to us by naming it the Bethesda Declaration.
The Great Barrington Declaration made the case that science was politicized. Director Bhattacharya, in his public response to the Bethesda Declaration, your complaint, also said that he was trying to depoliticize science. Your letter says that you want science to be depoliticized. On both sides, there is the claim that science is politicized and it needs to be depoliticized. Maybe speak to what the relationship is between science and politics. What is that relationship? What should be that relationship? Because now it's a competing claim.
There is a conception that when science leads to conclusions that you don't agree with, you can dismiss it as political. But that's not how science works. The data are the data, the results are the results, and you can interpret them. There's some leeway in the interpretation, but that's what peer review is for. And this isn't, and not only, if you take a single study, a single publication that may come to a certain result, that publication has gone through a peer review process where it has been looked at by at least 2, usually 3, maybe 4 experts in that field, and they're coming to a conclusion that, yes, this is a robust results. Yes, we believe them. And yes, we think that this should be published and put out there into the scientific community. But the way that scientific conclusions work is that they are the accumulation of many studies, not just one study, not even just 2 studies. We have a whole thing in science where we write review papers that take a number of different results from different studies and create a picture with them. And that is the conclusion that we as the scientific community come to.
At NIH in the hiring process, there's, at least currently, there is no ask about your political affiliation. It is just about your merit to the job that you're applying to. The scientists who are doing this have not been screened for any political ideology.
Right now, what's going on is they are canceling grants all over the place. They are canceling grants that are leading to patients who have cancer not being able to get novel cancer treatments when their only other option is hospice care. And no one voted for that. This is not a political issue. No one wants that cut. But Director Bhattacharya is being, it seems, forced by the current administration to cut things like that. And so the only way to justify that right now is by calling it political.
From J. Bhattacharya's point of view, he is also claiming that he is depoliticizing, and the grant cancellation and all of that are a part of depoliticization. You are essentially confronted by a political problem where you have competing claims with a person whose credentials you don't dispute.
When you say credentials, could you clarify what you mean by that?
He's an MD PhD.
And a Stanford professor.
And has served on NIH study section panels. Like he understands the ecosystem to a certain degree, for sure.
And even your letter makes a distinction between him and the HHS Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the rest of the Trump administration. You're trying to create daylight between them. So you are saying that you are not them.
Director Bhattacharya was actually directly asked about the budget that is coming up that poses an $18 billion cut, nearly 40% cut to the NIH budget. And he was asked, do you expect this $18 billion budget cut will lead to more clinical research? And his response was no, showing that, of course, these cuts will lead to less cancer research. So the way I took that was that he, as a medical professional, realizes the damage that these cuts will do. But given his political position, is still forced to do that and back that up.
You could, even if you argued that the people who were doing peer review, there was a political interference, I think it's really difficult to challenge the fact the reduction in funds is just going to lead to less trials. It's just reducing money. It's just reducing the ability to conduct the research.
A large part of the Bethesda Declaration was to urge him to stand up for science and come to the table with NIH staff and workers and understand the impacts and understand what's happening on the ground level so that he can make decisions and enact policies that fulfill the NIH mission.
Is the use of the word declaration then a way to create political space for you to protest so that he sees this as part of what he has already done? Or are there any substantive similarities between the Bethesda Declaration and the Great Barrington Declaration?
Ultimately, I think the choice of calling it the Bethesda Declaration was a way to get Dr. Bhattacharya's attention and to in a way, kind of connect and say, hey, look, we're dissenting too. Let's talk about it and have this conversation as a way to kind of come to his level.
Do you think Jay Bhattacharya is convincible about that? And if you were to really convince him, right, would he remain in the Trump administration?
We'll only know if we try.
I always like to have hope. Otherwise I wouldn't have bothered to continuously reach out to him over the last several months as part of the NIH Fellows Union. And it seems like when he's been made aware of things that he's been willing to do some small things around the margins. Originally, we couldn't do any ordering at the NIH, and he was able to lift some of those things when he came. But each time that those things have happened, there have been new roadblocks that have been put up that either he's not aware of or he just doesn't have the power to do anything about. For those things that he's not, he needs to be honest about what he can't do. If he's being ordered to do things, then he needs to be honest about that. And yesterday in the hearing, it seemed like he was being ordered by some higher power to terminate grants and cut the budget coming up. But if that's the case, he's the leader of the NIH. It's his job to stick up for the agency and for its mission.
Is there a real difference between doing it himself and being ordered to do it? A clinical trial is cut, the cancer patient can't get the drugs. That's it. There's not that much more to that.
In the Appropriations Committee hearing yesterday, Dick Durbin told him the buck stops with him. And so I'm gonna hang on to that.
When Molly and I took our positions, we did have to say an oath to the Constitution. And then our responsibility in our role is to protect the Constitution. And so, Jay also took this role with an understanding that he should be acting in the public's best interest. And so, I think your question is really important because whether he's being told that he has to do this or he's choosing to do this, his job as a person who is saying that he's going to be protecting public interest should be to his oath.
Public interest, democracy, constitutional rights are abstract notions. And the politics lies in how those things are defined. One of the biggest challenges in modern governance is the relationship between generalist politicians, they cannot be experts, with specialist subject matter experts such as yourself. And we see this even in the military. There's an entire field of study called civil military relations that addresses this issue. So I'm wondering now, to what extent are scientists taught politics, how the system is supposed to work? Especially at Director Bhattacharya's level, the position is truly political, much more than it is scientific. He's managing a bunch of scientists, but he's acting politically. How are you taught that? Is that something that happens in graduate school?
I went to graduate school at Oregon State University. And in my department, one of the professors was Jane Lubchenco, who later went on to lead NOAA under Obama. And she was all about science policy. And for me, she was my introduction to science policy and the idea that things that we can study on a basic science level can then be translated and applied to the outside world. And that's where the policy comes in. And the policy has to live within an environment that is political. It is the water in which we live. And then I did a postdoctoral fellowship that was NIH funded in the lab of Dr. Stephen Palumbi at Stanford University. And he also had a policy arm where he was doing research on the population genetics in marine systems and applying that to understanding and informing how marine reserves should be designed. I think that the policy and political training is out there, and I'm not even going to call it political training. I'm going to call it policy training because I think that's really what we're talking about. It's out there. It's just a matter of whether you have access to that and whether you have interest in it.
There are science policy people, but they sit adjacent to the lab. There is a sense that science is so neutral.
Absolutely. The ivory tower is real. There is the idea that science happens kind of in a vacuum in order to not be influenced by the outside world and in order to have your studies and results and designs and conclusions be unbiased. But again, it's the water and we're humans and there are implicit biases that we all carry that I combat every day when I'm orienting and training reviewers in how to evaluate in an unbiased way the grant applications that they're assessing for me. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I didn't want to speak for the entire scientific community. I think that policy training in sort of science within a social context, there's always more that can be done. But I do think that a lot of the training that we have received is around science communication. And we've generally been told, and I think it's a first step, that communicating science and educating the public on what we do and why it's important is in promoting science in a way that penetrates the political sphere, because what we do is powered by federal funding, and that is determined by congressional appropriations,
Tax dollars.
And so for scientists to be able to say, hey, we would love to see more money going to NSF. We would love to see more money going to NIH. You need to be able to educate the public, both the taxpayers and the legislators, on why what you're doing is important, even if you're not studying, say, cancer or human diseases. I come from a background of evolutionary biology. it's hard maybe to emphasize to the public why that impacts them on an everyday basis. And maybe it doesn't, but it's still important to do because knowledge benefits us all.
Yeah, so I bring this up for that exact reason. We are in this position because that truth has not been communicated in a systematic way, such that a significant portion of the country voted to do this.
I'd actually push back against that. I know a number of studies that have just come out by a number of survey research, which is actually went and talked to the American voters. And they found that 6 out of 10 American voters actually want the government to do more to study the health effects of climate change. And yet we see this administration trying to cut that. If you add in the people who want the government to do just as much on the current climate effects on health, you would actually get up to 8 out of 10. Yet this current administration is cutting that type of funding.
We know for a long time that the public wants to pay less in tax and have more services. The balance is shifted in one direction, sometimes it's others. So that's the politics, and it's real. That's the water. That's the contest.
Sure, but it's the job of the current director to advocate on, to improve the health and well-being of the American people. And right now he seems to be going along with the current administration to cut funding and terminate grants that the public is in favor of.
Oh, I would just also add that I think that, what you're talking about is people who voted for Trump. And I think a lot of people voted for Trump with sort of a trust that he would do good for them. And I think maybe most of them have come to the conclusion that, he's not doing the thing that I wanted him to do. He is not enacting policies that benefit me. Though I know that he does have a lot of supporters out there. But I think that a lot of the people who voted for him did so in sort of a lukewarm, we'll see what happens kind of way. And now we're seeing what happened.
Right. And so we have to wait 4 years now for the people to speak again and change to happen. I do want to talk about the impact of those cuts now. In particular, are there some kinds of fields that are affected more than others? So clearly, clinical trials are affected.
There are impacts on the grant side, the external grant side of NIH. There are impacts on the internal research side of NIH, of the research that is actually being done at NIH. And then there's impacts being felt in the scientific community that's funded by NIH, and there are impacts being felt in the patient community that benefits from NIH. And the most extreme, I think, impacts is literally people are dying as a result of clinical trials being cut off in midstream.
And that's mainly in the cancer area, or is it also in heart disease or mental health?
Yeah, and you can see even with patient organizations, like they're signing letters about various concerns to a number of different things. Kind of feels extremely widespread that it's not just the agency, but it's all of the universities that the agency funds, and then all the patient organizations and nonprofits that our agency funds. And
when Democrats lose the election, when Republicans come to power, they are going to benefit their primary supporters. It's a consequence of elections.
We're talking about the populations which are going to be most affected by health disparities and by some of the research that is being cut, right? And so if you're talking about doing a service to the voters, right, you would actually want to do that research, and you would want to support that research. West Virginia is affected by, drug overdoses disproportionately and such. And, supporting research into that is really important. So I think the representatives and the legislators actually understand that and want this funding to go forward. Again, I don't think it is a political issue in that sense of it's a Democrat or Republican issue, right? It affects all voters.
There are whole arms of the NIH that fund research in communities and community-based health, and then across HHS as well. There are agencies that this is their mission. Those programs are being cut. The research to specifically focus on underserved populations, including rural populations, that research is being cut.
I want to talk a little bit about the personal impact on you. And Anna, you've already left NIH. If you can please talk to your personal experience in that, and then we'll just go around the room after that.
Speaking in my personal capacity, not on behalf of any agency, any organization, just Anna Culbertson. Anna. I was a contractor at NIH for 3 years. My contract ended. I was unemployed for 7 months. And then I started my role at NIAID in December. I worked for 2 months and then I have been unemployed again. Well, I was on admin leave for a while, but been unemployed for the better part of a year. On a personal level, like emotionally taxing, I think, to taxpayers, me being paid to be on admin leave when I could have been working for 4 months is something to think about. I have letters of support from my supervisors that I was doing an amazing job. There was no reason for me to not be working other than the fact that I started in December. I'm a rare disease patient. I'm a rare disease advocate. The cuts and things that are happening at NIH and my job loss, it feels a lot bigger than me. It feels like I'm carrying other rare disease patients.
It's been traumatic for us, right? We started off with not being able to order any supplies, not being able to communicate, not being able to travel, right? We dedicate ourselves to this work to do life-saving biomedical research, kind of stuff that helps people not just in the US, but across the world. And so not being able to do our work is awful. And to be told that our work is not important is awful. We couldn't order anything. And then finally we could order things again. But then they fired everybody who was helped us do the ordering, so then we couldn't order again. When I publish a paper, I usually work with the communications staff who will help me write releases so that people can find out about my work, so that the American public can know that it's important. They fired all the people who does that. They arbitrarily decided that we're going to have these contract cuts of $2.6 billion. There's this issue where month by month, my friends are going up for their contracts to be extended. And normally they're extended months in advance. Everybody wants them to be extended. Last month, 13 people they said, well, we don't know what you do, so we're just going to not extend your contract arbitrarily. No one at the NIH wanted that. Those people were fired and there had to be a whole rescue mission to bring them back, and it was traumatic.
In order to explain the impacts on me, I need to explain how the grants process works. So there's a pipeline in terms of how NIH funding is allocated. External scientists submit grant applications to the NIH. We review them at the Center for Scientific Review, and then they're passed off to program officers and program directors at the funding institutes and centers to recommend funding. Because I'm relatively early in the grant pipeline process, things are relatively unaffected for me. At the same time, what we have seen are calls to start pulling and withdrawing grants before review, grants that involve foreign collaborations that previously could have been, if they're missing key documents related to foreign collaborations, historically, those have been able to be supplied after the review process before funding is recommended. Now they're just being withdrawn from consideration ahead of review. And then some of us are also being asked to look for keywords and identify grants that should be pulled because they might not align, in quotes, align with the policy of the current administration. And this means, searching for keywords like equity, diversity, research on transgender populations, etc.
Who is making the determination whether a grant is aligned with the priorities of the administration? or not?
None of us work on the program side and so can speak to it directly. When it was last reported, there was a Doge employee who was sending them back by the name of Rachel Riley. I don't know if she is still in that position. Then it gets bounced around between program officers and their directors because program officers will say, no, I already approved this once. And they're saying, look at it again. There's something that we see that could be problematic. And the program officers are saying, I've looked at it again. I think it's fine. This is not what this science is about. It can go forward. And it's coming back to them and saying, oh, I think you need to take another look at it. And so I think ultimately what's happening is nobody wants to take responsibility for pushing it forward and out.
The program directors are asking program officers to reconsider grants as an act of self-censorship?
That's exactly what's happening. And because when you say, oh, we don't want to fund DEI, none of these grants, very few of these grants are actually funding DEI as the actual definition is. But they won't say what they mean by DEI. They won't say what they mean by health disparities. They won't say what they mean. And so program is having to guess, and if they want to play it safe, they're going to terminate, freeze, withdraw, whatever grants that might have even a whiff if they have studied African-American heart disease in African-American populations. It's dead in the water.
I write grants and I write fellowships. I'm being told that I'm talking about bacteria, right? Nothing to do with people. And they say, don't use the word diversity when talking about the diversity of bacterial species, because otherwise your grant might get pulled. Since we're on this, I think something that gets left out in a lot of these stories is that, there's a lot of doom and gloom. There's bad things happening right now, right? That people who are counting on us to do life-saving research for diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's and antibacterial resistance, that the current cuts and politicization of research is stealing people's hope away. But what we're doing with this letter is a letter of hope. We are writing this. We wouldn't be bothering to write this letter if we didn't think that it was possible to right this ship. Because right now we're moving in the wrong direction. The current administration and Director Bhattacharya is pushing us in the wrong direction. And we are here and we are raising the alarm because we still think it's possible to go in the right direction. There has been irreparable damage done. There is no question of that. But we can still save this and we can still put us back going in the right direction.
Ian Morgan, Anna Culbertson, Molly Menier, thank you for taking the time. I hope NIH goes back to its old ways.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
'Cause I'm in, if it's on, I'm in, can't wait to get...
That was NIH employees Molly Manier and Ian Morgan and former NIH employee Anna Culbertson. One question that emerges from this discussion is whether science can be free of politics when it is funded and supported by a political process and has the objective of serving the public good. Keep in mind that the debate is not that public institutions work or do not work in public interest, but what exactly that public interest is and who gets to define it on behalf of an institution. Similar questions have bedeviled other specialist agencies, most notably the military. And problems of political leaders being able to control their generals has birthed a subfield of political science known as civil-military relations. Lincoln famously had problems with 5 generals of the Union Army until he found Grant. There are theories and theories on the matter, but one thing is clear. The line between politics and science, or the military, is never going to be clear. And that's because of the nature of politics. Ask yourself this: why do some issues become political while others do not? I like this example to illustrate the problem. Why is the purchase of a dishwasher less political? Almost not at all, but the purchase of a cooking stove highly charged. The dishwasher decision is a financial one. But there is consensus that saving water is a good thing, and over the years, dishwashers across the industry have reduced water use. Consensus depoliticizes and makes problems technical. But the stove decision we are fighting out now is between gas or electric. That's a charged debate rooted in climate change politics. That is political. To simplify greatly, when money, technology, science, religion, and even the law cannot resolve a debate, that is, build consensus, that becomes a political issue. And when an issue becomes political, it reshapes the debate and the institutions involved in the debate. When nothing else can solve a problem, it is left to politics to punt, reframe, maybe resolve. Because only politics offers a tool to be able to do that. We write our preferences on a piece of paper, put them all in a box, count up which option has more supporters, and then give them 4 years to try it out. Anyone that uses voting as a mechanism to determine future action is borrowing from politics. And lest we forget, society must continue to make decisions, sometimes even wrong ones, if they are to survive. There is little doubt that NIH is at a crossroads. Even if there is a remedy in the future, some losses are going to be permanent. But Ian Morgan is right. Every ship can be righted. And I will add, so long as it is still floating. NIH has produced some of the most incredible breakthroughs in medical science known to history, including work that went into making the COVID vaccine. The basic research done in government research institutions is seldom done by private companies. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities of Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Silver Spring power pop band The Airport 77s, Andy Sullivan on guitar, John Kelly on the drums, and Cal Everett on the bass. The songs for this episode come from their new album, Don't Let Go. You can find their music at airport77s.com and at live concerts all over the DC region. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Do you like ice cream? Depends on the time of year. Take it or leave it in February, but summer's almost here. I got a buddy down at Baskin Robbins, maybe he can hook us up. 31 flavors, rainbow jimmies, need a bucket loader, let's hop a city bus, see where it takes us. Wind up in some neighborhood where we've never been before. Maybe we can make new friends, maybe we'll just get lost. Ask our fellow strap hangers where they think we should get off, 'cause I'm in if it's on.